Hello Horror Hounds. I've been wanting to do a video on From Hell for quite a while now, but not just a straightforward review. I wanted to share with you some thoughts I've had about the movie upon first watching it. It came out 15 years ago, came out in 2001, and I was a big fan of the source material that the movie is based on. And even after first viewing, I've never considered it to be an adaptation of the source material, but rather an extension of it, working almost like an appendices to it, or even in a metaphysical way, a sequel to it. So the original piece of work is From Hell, a comic by Alan Grant and Eddie Campbell, collected here. It's a big beast. It's a masterpiece. Anyone with even a passing interest in Jack the Ripper films or the history of Jack the Ripper and the like, you would do well, if you haven't already, to get yourself a copy of From Hell. It's an extraordinarily detailed piece of comic book fiction. The hook that Alan Moore uses to hang his story on is Steve Knight's book Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution. It's a nonsensical Jack the Ripper theory to do with royal conspiracy and assassination, an illegitimate royal child, and the Catholic Church and the like, and fits up a royal. Well, all right. Let's not reveal who Jack the Ripper is in this and the film version, because you might not have seen the film, you might not have read this, and you want to read it. Let's just say, as far as real history goes, the idea that there was some grand royal and political conspiracy to kill 5 prostitutes because of a secret they knew is absolute nonsense. However, for the purposes of telling this story, Alan Moore's story, so that we can go from the street level slums and the poor all the way up to the heads of state and prime ministers and the Queen, it's the perfect angle to explore the politics, the religion, the socio-economics, and all of the other phantasmagoria that surrounds the Jack the Ripper myth, not just the physical facts of the murders, but the hysteria that caused it and surrounded it, and that it caused as well. This is a phenomenal piece of work. It's a towering piece of work. The central premise of it is nonsense, but this work itself actually has fun with that central premise. Anyone who's read this and is knowledgeable about this will know what I mean when I just reference the Dance of the Gull Catchers. In 2001 then, the Hughes brothers release From Hell, starring Johnny Depp and Heather Graham, a film adaptation of the comic, except it's not at all. And what is not a very well received film, specifically, is especially from comics fans and fans of Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's work. I like this film, but I think I like it because of my weird mental approach to it, and an approach that I took even the first time I was watching it. As the film was playing, it became very, very obvious to me very early on that this is not an adaptation of the comic, in exactly the same way that the comic was not really an adaptation of Steve Knight's Jack the Ripper: The Final Solution. It was just another hook to hang a completely different story on. And strangely, I think that this is another weird appendices to this. The back of From Hell is rife with appendices and notes. Each issue has an appendix and copious notes to it, and I think that this film works as another appendix to this work, or as I teased a little earlier, actually a straight sequel. I can't ever watch this without feeling that this is a metaphysical sequel to the comic book, and I will now explain why I think that is. Right, so the comic takes place in the real world, the real historical Victorian London. I don't think that this film takes place in the real world at all. All the way throughout, the film has a woozy, dreamlike quality and aesthetic to it. Not just with Johnny Depp's character and his psychic visions all the way through. In fact, the film starts with what I think is a screaming signpost to anyone who knows the language of cinema, that what follows should be taken with a pinch of the salt of reality. If you've seen Mulholland Drive, you'll know that that movie opens with an establishing shot of someone asleep and dreaming. Okay, David Lynch could not be clearer in his opening shot that what follows could be considered a dream, dreamlike, nightmarish, quasi-dreamlike, dream logic, in exactly the same way. From Hell opens with close-up and detailed shots of the preparation of and the smoking of opium over the opening credits. And then we get a close-up of Depp's closed eyes, slowly opening, dissolving into an establishing shot of London. If you need a film to tell you that what's following is hallucinatory, then it's the film starting with someone going on a drug trip. And then us seeing their eyes opening, and what follows is what they see. You could argue, in the language of cinema, I'm very aware that this personal reading of From Hell has counter arguments to say that everything I'm about to say is wrong. It's a personal view. I don't think my way of watching this film is right and everyone else is wrong. That's not how I roll. I just thought you might be interested in my take, my personal take on From Hell. Let's move on. I'm going to be bolder, I'm going to go further, and I'm going to take the dream logic of the movie one step further. Johnny Depp's character, Inspector Abberline, in the film is actually a fusion of two characters from the comic. In fact, it's a fusion of the two characters that the comic opens with on the very first page. That would be Inspector Abberline, who's investigating the murders, and Robert Lees, a man who claims to be psychic and has visions of the murders and the murderer. Those two characters in this film smushed together. I know that's done a lot in movies. You know where else it happens? It happens in dreams, where you meet someone. Do you remember you would have had a dream where you're talking to someone and then they are suddenly someone else, or they're two people at the same time, or you're two people at the same time in a dream. David Lynch deals with this all the time. The Lost Highway is a film almost entirely about that, and it's present here. It was another indicator to me that it's not a straight adaptation of this, it's a dream version of that. So Johnny Depp's character is now two characters at once. And I'm going to run with the idea that character and the notion of I is very fluid in this movie. Now there's a scene, maybe midway through the film, where Abberline and his partner are at the murder scene of Annie Chapman, and he puts pennies over Annie's eyes, and Abberline is asked why he does that. And he says, "For the ferryman who takes the body across the river into the land of the dead. If she don't have the money to pay him, she'd have to wander forever, lost between the two worlds." So we have a dreamlike quality to the place they're staying, and we're having the notion that Annie Chapman, now dead, is lost between two worlds until she can cross over into the land of the dead. Much later on in the film, Netley, the coach driver, says to the killer, says to Jack, "I don't know where I am anymore." And Jack says, "I shall tell you where we are. We are in the most extreme and utter region of the human mind, a radiant abyss where man meets themselves. And Netley says, I don't understand what that means. Hell, Netley. We're in hell. Now, that's a reference to the title, which is a reference to a letter sent to the police, one of dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of letters sent to the police, purportedly from Jack the Ripper. This particular very famous letter was signed from hell. But again, in this film, although taking from the source material and taking from history, the film is explicitly saying that the region that we're in at the moment, where all of these events are operating, the region that we're inhabiting within this film is an extreme region. It's a region where reality breaks down. It's a radiant abyss, Jack says, where man meets themselves. In my mind, I think that this film takes place in a sort of purgatory, a kind of limbo. And I think that some of the souls, some of the people tied up in these events are trapped in this state and reliving those events and trying to amend for their sins. But I don't think that because Johnny Depp's character calls himself Abberline and everyone calls him Abberline in this, I don't think that necessarily means that that soul is Abberline's soul. I have a very specific theory as to who I think Johnny Depp is actually playing in the movie From Hell, and it's not Abberline. There are instances throughout the film where identity is sort of called into question or played with. When Liz Stride is invited into Jack's carriage, the first thing she says upon seeing him is, "For a moment, I thought you were someone else." Earlier on in that scene, we see Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's son, one of the suspects in the comic and in the film, at a charity drive. And there's a very strange shot which mirrors him and Depp's character, where he gets up and he leaves the shot, and just as Albert Victor leaves the shot on one side of the frame, Johnny Depp moves in. They're never in the same frame together ever. There's another weird scene later on where Johnny Depp's Abberline takes Mary Kelly to the National Portrait Gallery to show her a portrait of Prince Albert Victor, to ask her, is this the man that you saw your friend with? And it always struck me that there was a weird mirroring going on between Prince Albert Victor and Abberline. So I'm going to lay it out here. I think Johnny Depp's character is the soul of Prince Albert Victor, trapped in some purgatorial state, trying to make amends for the sins of his life and the influence he had on the Jack the Ripper murders, his associated guilt. I think the souls in it are transient souls, and God knows how many times he's gone on the roundabout of this, trying to atone, and maybe he's done it in many different guises. Maybe he's done it, as one of the prostitutes, as his mother, as himself, now this time as Abberline. I told you it was a little bit out there. And do you know what cinches it for me? It's Abberline's partner in this, a character that Robbie Coltrane plays, who, since the first time I watched it, always struck me as sort of like a guardian angel type figure, seeming to help him, but also seeming to guide him in a bigger mystery than the one he thinks he's playing out. The character's name, a little on the nose, you might think, if you want to buy into my theory, he's called Godly. So the character that I think is a guardian angel type character is Godly. Okay, and if you want to watch it with my idea in mind, that it's set in some sort of purgatory, then tons of lines take on a different meaning and resonate in different ways. The scene where Godley urges Aberline to leave and go and live with Mary in Ireland, he actually tells him uh, to move on, and he says to him, do you want to live the rest of your life like a ghost? Is that it? Again, referencing this the state that they're all in as a limbo, as an afterlife, but not a final destination. He's saying that unless Aberline himself moves on, he'll be in this purgatorial state that he referenced, between worlds, with reference to Annie Chapman. Godley's character has a weird character tick in that he's always quoting Shakespeare. It comes from nowhere, it goes nowhere, but I thought it would be interesting to note the Shakespeare references that he uses. Now, the first one is, I must be cruel only to be kind, as the poet said, the poet being Shakespeare. That's from Hamlet, which is in part a meditation. It's the most famous speech in Hamlet, to be or not to be, is a meditation on life and the afterlife. If we die, what happens next? The next quote is at a funeral, and Godley's again, a quote this time from Measure for Measure, meditating on death. I to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot. That particular speech is, again, it mirrors the Hamlet speech in many ways, and it's a meditation on what comes after death. And Measure for Measure is in part a play also about justice and a balancing of the scales and making sure that justice is served. And if you want to watch the film as this soul trying to atone in purgatory, it's a perfect reference. The third quote is once more, "Unto the breach, dear friends," from Henry V. I got nothing on that really, apart from that it's a nod to the royal connection. The next one, "A rose by any other name." We know this quote. It's entered into the lexicon of the English language. It's from Romeo and Juliet, and the scene where that quote comes in is I believe the Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? You know, if only you didn't have the name, the surname of my family's enemy, then there would be no impediment to us being together, and a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Just because you're a Capulet and I'm a Montague, if we were called different things, we would still be the same person. So this notion, I'm stretching a little, but of shifting identities and the transference of names and identities. The clincher for me at the very end, when we come full circle and Aberline is in the opium den and his eyes are closed and Godley finds him and he's passed on, indicating perhaps that everything that came between was a hallucination, was a dream. Godley puts the coins on Aberline's eyes so that he can move on to the next world, and the quote he says is from Hamlet, "Good night, sweet prince." He calls him a prince. And you can say I'm crazy, and you can say that that's just the most apposite quote from Hamlet. But to me, in the weird way I like to watch this film, it's the final admission that Godley is a celestial being in this purgatorial court drama, whilst other people there, other souls trapped for eternity, or of the demonic persuasion, trying to keep him or make him fail or send him down to the other place. It's an admission to me that this was actually a metaphysical, supernatural struggle for the soul of Prince Albert Victor, the prince who was the catalyst of everything. His weakness led to all this death, plotting, murder and destruction. And to me, this film is the limbo-stricken soul of Prince Albert Victor in the dream state body of Inspector Abberline and the psychic Robert Lees trying to unpick the mystery and atone for the sins, the end result of which was so much death, murder, and bloodshed. It's a little out there, but next time you watch From Hell, watch it with a view to imagining that everything that is taking place in the afterlife, and these are things that this soul, who's not Abberline, has to do in order to move on. And if you do that, I promise you, it's not a watertight theory, but lines will start jumping out at you with secondary or different meanings, and scenes will the weight in a scene will shift, and you'll suddenly become slightly more uncertain of the reality that's being played out, and you might think, do you know what? I don't buy it. I don't buy Andrew's theory, not for a second, but it's a really interesting mental exercise. Let me know what you think. How crazy am I?